Hello everyone and welcome to another REC video podcast. My name is Neil Carberry, the REC Chief Executive. I'm joined this afternoon by the REC's Deputy Chief Executive, Kate Shoesmith. Good afternoon, Kate.
Hi, Neil.
About a month ago, we sat down to digest, in fact, still less than a month ago, we sat down to digest Kwasi Kwarteng's not very mini budget and the raft of changes that have been made since, that he was making at that time. And of course, that was really the start of the next great dip in the roller coaster of British politics and economics, with everything that's played out, leading to, of course, ultimately his sacking and the resignation of Liz Truss as Prime Minister after 6 weeks in the job. So, and of course, Jeremy Hunt's U-turns on a wide range of the policies that he was announcing back at the mini budget. So what we thought we'd do is sort of explore where we think we are now. As I recall, Kate, when we recorded that session with Shazia Ijaz, our campaigns director, we were already talking about fiscal and monetary stability as being something that was on our mind, given the scale of the package. And the roller coaster's been so fast that Shaz is on leave today, because you just need to take a moment to step back from the madness of the last month. But there's a real sense here that a government that came in talking a pro-business and pro-growth language really kind of overstretched itself, and now we're almost back where we were before the mini budget. Is that fair?
I think that's entirely fair, Neil. So it's been a very long few weeks, hasn't it? So much has changed and then almost not changed straight away. When last time we had a conversation, you were very clear about the importance of fiscal stability at this point in time, and the almost immediate reaction of the markets was anything but that after the mini budget. And so it perhaps wasn't hugely surprising to find that as soon as a new Chancellor was in post and Jeremy Hunt's taken over that role, that he rode back on so many of those announcements. So on a really clear level for our members, the things that we were particularly interested in and saw, we heard an awful lot about how they were doing away with the IR35 reforms that are 2017 and 2021 to the public sector. That's gone. So we are exactly where we were as of the 22nd of September. Those reforms stay in place. There's not going to be a change come April. For us, it's a very clear message. There's all of the changes that we've seen to IR35 shows that we have to be reviewing these policies and thinking about the big picture. Where's the enforcement for what happens in this sector? How do we have a proper tool that allows people to register their information and get a real judgment about whether they're inside or outside IR35, and it's robust enough that it can be relied upon by the client, the hiring body, by the agency, the umbrella, whoever that may be. So for us, nothing has particularly changed in some of these regards, but it does feel like there's so much more that's up in the air.
So I want to dive in on IR35 in a second, because I think it's a really great example of where government gets things wrong. Whereas I think it's fair to say that neither the abolition of the 17 and 21 changes nor their reinstatement by Jeremy Hunt actually solved the fundamental issues, which, as you've hinted at there. But can we just start with this thing about pro-business, pro-growth language? Because for me, growth is the only thing, I think we said originally, growth is the only thing that allows you to have funded public services and to keep taxes at a reasonable level in the context of a time when families and businesses are under pressure. So a pro-growth agenda, a pro-business agenda is a natural for any government coming into office. And we don't know right now who wins the expedited Conservative Party leadership competition, albeit that we're reasonably clear who the two major candidates are, and one of them seems remarkably familiar. There's a job of work for us to do here, really, in kind of getting a pro-business agenda taken on board by whoever comes in, and making sure that the kind of rather inexpert way that the Truss cabinet handled trying to boost growth doesn't take us away from doing the things that are really important to business.
Yes, the likely candidates are very familiar, aren't they? In terms of we've been there, done that. We know exactly where they stand and what type of agenda they put together for business. Most people are thinking further ahead than this, and rightly so. Is that if we know that we have to have a general election come January 2025 at the absolute latest, how much longer can it really be before a general election is called? Now, you and I have talked about this, Neil. We can't see a path to a general election in the next week or so, that's for certain. But it has to be sooner rather than later. So to push it all the way out to 2025 feels unreasonable. So what we have to be talking about at this time is what allows businesses stability and the ability to grow and invest in the right way, no matter what your political allegiance, no matter where you're sitting on the front benches. How are we talking to the parties that demonstrates the value that recruiters in particular bring to the sector? There's so much that we've been seeing over the last few years about how the market has stepped in and provided that absolute necessity of support during the pandemic. Just look at the NHS and how it's been propped up but by agencies and their workers. Look at what's happening in terms of people in public sectors wanting to work via agencies over this time, and increasingly so. So for us, it's about how do we describe that flexible labour market? How do we demonstrate the growth opportunities that are there, that it is something that is important for that economic growth and stability, and that there's levers to play there if you want to shore up businesses investing in the right way, and then it trickles into society. I want to avoid saying trickle down, but you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I think trickle down as a phrase is probably out in British politics for some time. But that thing about demonstrating the good, we talk about making good work happen as an industry. I think there's something in how we talk about the good that businesses do that gets us back from that kind of that position that the almost the pro-growth agendas had been hijacked into by the mini budget package. I mean, you've already said it. The only path to a general election soon is a significant number of Conservative backbenchers leaving the party. If they remain in the party, which seems likely, then the majority is big enough that they're not, turkeys do not typically vote for Christmas. They're a long way behind in the polls. It's very unlikely we'll see a general election soon. So as businesses, we're sort of looking at a bit of a double game, which is if the polls don't change, the Labour front bench is now a lot more relevant to everyone, whether it's a year out or 2 years out. But the government of the day is always relevant. And for us as an organisation, and for recruiters and staffing firms as a sector, that means we need to know firmly where we stand and to talk even-handedly to both sides of the house about it. And you put the focus on the value that the flexible staffing has driven in the public sector and health, but also in terms of keeping things going in retail and hospitality, and other sectors have had a big bounce since the opening up from the pandemic, and now things are looking a little more stodgy, but we're still seeing data that shows that while companies are getting concerned, our jobs outlook was out earlier in the week, our companies are getting more concerned about their own prospects and the economy. They're still grasping for resources because of the shortage, which is why the work the REC did on overcoming shortages, and that campaign is about talking to government, but also talking to recruiters' clients about what they might do. I was down in Kent earlier in the week talking to the Kent Invicta Chamber of Commerce just about this. That's a really powerful tool to start conversations in the business community, because I think the more we can do away from Whitehall and Westminster at this time of tumult, whether it's with mayors, with clients, with the devolved nations governments, there's real opportunity to make some change there. Bringing it back to London, you've mentioned IR35. I'd throw the apprenticeship levy. I'd throw the mess of IDVT and building a real right to work system that is genuinely digital and easy to access and low cost for the sector into a pot that's marked supply side reform, actually. to borrow a phrase from the current and soon to be former Prime Minister. But the difference is those are hard yards. Those take time to build up. You know, you've mentioned on R35 that getting the CES tool right, getting enforcement in place, getting that umbrella company legislation that you and I and colleagues from across the industry have beaten our heads off the door at the Bays and the Treasury for years trying to get, because it's so important to making the system work, getting the discussion about a flexible skills levy. All of these are things where government could make a real difference to growth, and they're not big and they're not sexy for the man or woman in the street, but actually they could have some real potential. That feels like hard and long work to do, but the stuff that might have a long-term benefit to the industry. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. So there's some levers at our disposal. So we know that so the current Business Secretary of State has made it very clear that in his mandate, it would be to reduce any of the EU-derived legislation that currently governs what it is that we do within the UK. And that EU sunsetting bill that Jacob Rees-Mogg has proposed and has backers for, the deadline for getting rid of an awful lot of this EU-derived legislation is the end of next year. I mean, it's scarily close. And regardless of who is the future business secretary, and it may well be the incumbent now, and regardless of if there is a general election within the coming months and years ahead, the likelihood is there is a sense of how do you finalise the whole Brexit scenario? How do you have a shift and a move on from all of that rhetoric? And some of it is about thinking about what's the legal framework and how do we have that clear blue water between UK law and EU derived law. So the lever at our disposal is how do we provide a better quality framework for the UK flexible labour market that encompasses everything that you've just been talking about, Neil. So whether that's the tax system, what are we doing to recognise people that are working as in a way that isn't the typical 9 to 5 permanent 5 days a week role, which is, by the way, half the population doesn't work Absolutely. That way anymore. So what is it that helps the tax system really work? And you factor into that, thinking about IR35 or whatever the future is of that. You think about the skills system that we require, and that obviously should be underpinned by a more flexible apprenticeship levy that allows people who are working on a temporary basis to be able to access the funds, and most importantly, the agencies that are paying into that to be able to support their temps. You start to think about all the things that we've seen in terms of case law and judgments over time, not least Harper Trust, and what do we do to really start to unpick what happens around holiday pay so it actually makes sense again. So there's certain things here that for us they might be the big picture, but it is a case of, well, what levers can we use at our disposal that are of interest to the politicians right now? And very much in the onus will be on the recruitment sector to really lead what would be proper reform that would allow and unlock some of this growth potential. How would it support greater business investment, drives to recruit more people in the right way? How would it give businesses clarity when they're hiring staff, and really protect the workers? Because that symbiotic relationship is all important. So, and I think Neil, you're right in terms of you've been talking to an awful lot of clients of late and business representatives. And do you think they see it in the same light? Do you get the sense that there is something that they're looking to their recruitment partners for?
Yeah, look, I think if you talk to REC members across the country, you talk to businesses, we're at this space where our data would suggest that consumers have lost a bit of confidence. Maybe in perm, it's more difficult to free people up from roles. Companies are still grasping for resources, but their businesses are changing fast. So that whole piece about advisory and the sector as professional service and client care, and in fact, in such a tight market, candidate care as client care, all of those things, standards seem super important. They always are important, but more important than ever right now. So I think as an industry, if we're thinking about our role and the role of the REC as part of that, I think it's a real moment for recruiters to step up, especially in the context of what is a very challenging economic position. And, you know, very pleased to publish our guide to future-proofing your recruitment business recently as a compendium of some of the REC's thinking of that. Is available on the website. But if you turn to the politics, I think people are grasping for solutions around productivity, around growth in an environment with very tight labour markets. That's a moment for the REC and REC members to be bringers of solutions both to business and to government. And when we look across that, I think it is about big long-term articulation of how regulation should change. You've mentioned a number of regulations. The most important thing is just explaining to government that not everyone works like a civil servant, and that we need to profile the value of temporary workers and what they can and do give to our economy and the protection they need. I mean, many of us spent hours going through the furlough regulations back in 2020 to work out how they applied to temps, because no one had thought about a temp when they were being drafted. So in an environment where government has a very narrow political envelope now, because up to the general election, having tried to go big, I suspect whoever wins the Conservative leadership competition will be reasonably bounded in. So they will be thinking about what happens after the next general election, and clearly Labour are thinking about that. There's probably time for us as an industry to bring forward some of those suggestions. So you mentioned the sunsetting of EU regulations. I think it's really important for REC members to understand that what the last month's done is probably mean that that nothing substantive will change very quickly. And that's why engagement with us and making sure you're feeding back your frustrations, the things you'd like to change, is going to be really important, because I think we're building a wall slowly rather than bashing one down with a bulldozer as we thought maybe Kwasi was doing. There are a couple of areas where I think quicker change is more likely or possible. One of the things we'll be watching very closely is the national insurance change, which has been legislated for to change at the end of the month. That was a big commitment from Liz Truss in her leadership campaign, but of course that is irrelevant after next Friday. So on balance, I think, Kate, we think that NI cut stays, but just watch out for it, because government is clearly shopping for things it can U-turn on. But the other big one, and it goes to the heart of the kind of the fallout between Suella Braverman and Hunt and Truss, is immigration, because it was pretty clear that one of the ways in which the Chancellor and the Prime Minister were hoping to boost the OBR's expectations of growth in the economy and therefore push down the cuts that they might have to make was to open the gates a little more to immigration into the United Kingdom, which has a net effect of boosting growth over time. And of course, Braverman is in much more, from the Brexit wing of the Conservative Party, much more keen on controlling immigration, and that was at the heart of their falling out. So it seems like that there's a more open discussion between government and business about immigration coming.
It definitely feels like there's the ability to move it away from the very almost personal political conversations that you might have around immigration into a far more practical, business-centric conversation, which would be led by what are our current deep-seated issues as an economy, and what is preventing, as you rightly say, what is preventing a business from being able to grow right now? Well, fundamentally, they simply cannot hire enough people to do the roles that they have is one of the key barriers to growth. And of course, you should be thinking about what's your domestic talent solution to this. So what are we doing to training enough people, making sure they understand the careers that are available to them while they're still in full-time education, while that they're selecting the right options, that there is the ability to engage with people that are further away from the jobs market. We know so many recruiters are doing great work with via us, local job centres, via our partner Maximus on the Restart scheme. We had great engagement around Kickstart too. What are we doing to encourage people that have perhaps opted to be economically inactive as a direct result of what they went through during the pandemic and are squeezed by the fact that they simply don't have care that allows them to balance work and life responsibilities, family responsibilities? There's all of that. At the same time, the positions are vacant right now. There is a sensible grown-up conversation to be had around an immigration system that is fit for purpose, that allows a business, so for instance, who is sponsoring somebody on a visa scheme, and they put in a couple of years of support into that person, perhaps it's a university graduate, and then the visa scheme, before you know it, is up. And 2 years isn't very long, as we all know, to have somebody in post. What would be a sensible extension to that graduate visa scheme, to other skilled trade visas, just to allow the business to really benefit from a system that is fit for purpose? And that's the type of level of conversation that we have been having with Home Office and with other colleagues, because and taking it away from that political conversation. And you rightly mentioned the other side of that. The system is obviously there's a right to work check that exists for people coming into the UK, but the system that is there for UK nationals isn't necessarily fit for purpose either. So we fought long and hard for that to be recognised, that we needed some form of digital scheme during the pandemic, and got that extended as far as we possibly could. But we really need to see greater investment in a system that truly does allow us to take advantage of the technologies that's out there, and the security that's behind all of that. Because what we have right now is a bit of a halfway house, if we're honest, and really does need some work, so that businesses are getting a much more responsive system, and the one that works for all sizes of business, and no matter where you are.
I think that's a really good point, and kind of want to acknowledge those are points that you landed personally in Parliament recently on members' behalf. And I think the fact that the REC and the industry is getting a hearing is a reflection of the great work our members are doing around the country and being seen as a professional service. Certainly, recruiters being invited into different rooms now when we're talking to government, and our advice being sought. So let's just try and sum this up a little bit. I think the first and most important conclusion, I think, from what you've been telling us, Kate, and I've certainly seen myself, is whatever happens in the Conservative leadership election, the envelope for political action that the government now has is much smaller than it was before, because they tried the Big Bang and it fell and it blew up in their faces, but also we're near an election. Probably there's a bit more wiggle room if it is the former Prime Minister who takes over, because that's a return to a set of policies from before July. But certainly that sense of pro-growth policies will be a longer battle, and we'll need to think about how we land those policies in the context of a fiscal picture that needs to be carefully controlled and come up with good ideas. But we're not expecting things to change quickly. So I think that's an important conclusion. The second conclusion is that despite the kind of the explosion of the Truss premiership, pro-business, pro-growth is not going to go away, because it's the only way you solve this problem. So we are expecting to see, for instance, the debate on immigration to be lively, whoever wins. And we are expecting debate on tax to be lively, whoever wins. And the one short-term moving part on that is probably the NI reversion, which we think it would be difficult to move on the 31st now, but be aware that when the Chancellor makes his fiscal statement at the end of the month, that is something to watch for. And then the third bit is just both parties thinking about what happens at a general election. So for us as recruiters, just making sure that we're getting our message across to both sides of the house. And that, of course, is the REC's job to lead. But we'll be looking to discuss with members what are the pain points they really need us to help address. And that's really important going into the renewals period. But just to close, I think it also, kind of fourth and final point, it throws it back on us as the business community to show what we can do. And I think a lot of that for recruiters is in the value we deliver for clients, which of course there's lots of in thinking around in the Overcoming Shortages report and some of the other things that we've been doing at the REC. I mentioned the Future Proofing Guide earlier. Those things seem to me to be really critical to the standing of the industry. Is that something that potentially, because of the political tumult, we need to be thinking about what we can drive ourselves? Is that something that resonates with you, Kate?
It does, and there's two particular thoughts at front of mind for me. Is one, remember that MPs are there as representatives of their constituents first and foremost, and they will be on this long journey now to a general election. Some will obviously be standing down, but there'll be others coming in their place. They're very keen to hear from business leaders in their community. Absolutely. About what they're doing to deliver growth, to deliver jobs, to support others within their constituency. So there's a huge role that a recruitment business suddenly becomes a very interesting place for MPs, and we've got tools and packages to help members if they want to engage their MPs. The second thing is the things that are to where you were heading, Neil. The things that are the practical barriers to you operating as a recruitment business right now, and where you might be seeking greater levels of support in some of the uncertainty that lies ahead. So the energy price cap that we know is in place for 6 months, what happens post March, April next year, the really practical sense of what does that mean for your business and for your supply chain is the type of thing that lands very well. And people the political side want to know, because those are the areas where we can start to have a conversation and influence some of the outcomes. We know that there'll be a sense of wanting to support particular sectors first and foremost. And I've already said it previously, is that I very much doubt that office-based sectors will be high on that list for support. However, there will be parts of your supply chain within recruitment organisations that will be really central to this. What type of levers do you need? And is it a different type of emergency package rather than just an energy price cap? Really required right now in order to allow a business to maintain operations and potentially invest in its future. Those are the types of things that are really helpful to us at this point in time.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think that local activity, local explanation. Of course, we've got the industry status report coming out in December, which is a really great way of talking about the value of the industry. And we'll do a lot of talking about value and standards as part of our positioning with both parties to make the case for some of this hard reform, the kind of things that will sort out Harper Trust versus Brazel and holiday pay and the working time regulations and so forth. But also thinking about how we're helping our clients navigate this, and there'll be more tools from the REC coming through the rest of the year into next year to help with that as well. So as always, it's a case of we aren't where we expected to be when we talked about the mini budget just under a month ago. There is work to do to get government policy into the right space. Some of that is long-term work, some of it is short-term work, but I think at the heart of it is the standing of the industry and the contribution it makes. So most important thing is making sure we're communicating that. That's what the REC will be trying to do, supporting members to do, and shoulders back, head up, because at a time like this, the industry is making a massive contribution. I think for now, that's as much as we can say until we get some direction on the shape of the new government from the 28th of October. But Kate, And thanks for joining me to explore all that this afternoon.
Thank you, Neil. And as always, members feel very free to contact us if there's particular areas we didn't cover, things that you've perhaps been thinking of and want to have a broader conversation. We'll be happy to help on that.
Absolutely. Your organisation, your needs at the heart of everything we do. Just get in touch with Kate, me, or any member of our team and join us again on another podcast. I'll look forward to seeing you either in person or online sometime soon. Have a great rest of your day.